Welcome to Truth Quest, where we uncover hidden facts and reveal the realities shaping our world. Your journey to the truth begins here. On a September evening in Missouri, Marcellus Williams, a man convicted of the 1998 murder of journalist Felicia Gale, was executed by lethal injection. Williams' case, which had spanned over 2 decades, remained fraught with controversy and widespread public debate. His execution occurred despite new DNA evidence that his defense claimed proved his innocence and amid allegations of racial bias, unreliable testimony, and prosecutorial misconduct. Williams' case has since reignited conversations about wrongful convictions, racial inequality in the criminal justice system, and the death penalty's irreversible nature, particularly in cases where evidence may still be in dispute. Overview of the crime. In August 1998, Felicia Gale, a 42-year-old former journalist for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, was brutally murdered in her University City home. She was stabbed 43 times in what appeared to be a violent home invasion. The murder shocked the St. Louis community, especially given Gale's prominent status as a journalist and community figure. Williams, an African-American man, was arrested shortly after the murder. He had a criminal record, including charges of burglary, which authorities believed connected him to the crime. Police theorized that Williams had broken into Gale's home with the intent to burglarize it and, when caught by the homeowner, stabbed her to death in a frenzy. The prosecution's narrative was relatively straightforward. Williams was a career criminal who had broken into Gale's house, stolen items, and then killed her when she interrupted his robbery. They linked Williams to the crime based on circumstantial evidence, including witness statements and items allegedly found in his possession after the crime. Key evidence against Williams' conviction in 2001 was largely built on circumstantial evidence, though it was enough for a jury to find him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Some of the most important elements of the prosecution's case included witness testimony. Several witnesses testified against Williams, including his former girlfriend and a jailhouse informant. His girlfriend claimed Williams had confessed to the crime, and the jailhouse informant, Henry Cole, testified that Williams had similarly admitted to the murder while they were incarcerated together. Stolen items. Prosecutors pointed to several items found in Williams' possession that belonged to Gale or her husband, including a laptop computer. They argued that these items were stolen during the burglary, further implicating Williams. No forced entry. The prosecution argued that the lack of forced entry into Gale's home indicated that Williams had entered through an unlocked door, adding to the theory that he was there to burglarize the house. Defense and questions of guilt. From the outset, Williams maintained his innocence, denying any involvement in Gale's death. His defense team questioned the credibility of the key witnesses, especially Henry Cole, who had received a reduced sentence in exchange for his testimony. Jailhouse informants have been widely criticized in legal circles due to the potential for fabricating confessions in order to gain leniency from prosecutors. Additionally, Williams' attorneys raised doubts about the thoroughness of the investigation, arguing that police had not fully pursued other possible suspects. They contended that the prosecution's case relied too heavily on circumstantial evidence and unreliable witnesses rather than any direct physical evidence linking Williams to the crime scene. DNA testing and new developments. A major development in the case came nearly 17 years after the original conviction, in 2015, when DNA testing on the murder weapon revealed that Williams' DNA was not present on the knife used to kill Gale. Instead, the tests identified DNA from an unknown male. This evidence called into question the prosecution's narrative, as the absence of Williams' DNA on the murder weapon challenged the idea that he had stabbed Gale repeatedly. The results from this DNA test formed the crux of Williams' appeals and defense efforts to overturn his conviction. His legal team, as well as organizations such as the Innocence Project, argued that the new DNA evidence provided reasonable doubt about his guilt and warranted either a retrial or the vacating of his death sentence. Involvement of the St. Louis County prosecutor. In an unusual turn of events, St. Louis County prosecutor Wesley Bell, who took office after the original conviction, reviewed the case and sided with Williams' defense. Bell, whose role is typically to defend prior convictions made by the prosecution's office, publicly advocated for the conviction to be overturned, citing concerns over the strength of the DNA evidence and the reliability of the original trial. Bell's decision to join the defense in seeking a new trial for Williams raised significant questions about the integrity of the original conviction. He argued that there was insufficient physical evidence linking Williams to the crime, especially in light of the DNA results that excluded Williams as the source of the DNA on the murder weapon. However, Bell's request to vacate the conviction was met with opposition from Missouri's Attorney General's office, which maintained that the conviction should stand despite the DNA findings. The state argued that the DNA evidence did not conclusively exonerate Williams, and they pointed to other pieces of circumstantial evidence and witness testimonies as sufficient grounds to uphold the original verdict. Racial bias and jury selection. Another critical component of Williams' defense centered around allegations of racial bias during the jury selection process. Williams' attorneys argued that the original trial was marred by discrimination, with the prosecution striking potential black jurors from the pool. This practice, known as a peremptory strike, was used to exclude a black juror who the defense believed could have influenced the jury's deliberations. This issue of racial bias in jury selection drew upon the 1986 Supreme Court ruling in Batson v. Kentucky, which prohibits racial discrimination in jury selection. Williams' legal team argued that his rights had been violated because the trial was conducted before an almost entirely white jury, despite him being an African American man in a case involving a white victim. Appeals and the U.S. Supreme Court's involvement. Williams' legal team filed multiple appeals over the years, challenging the conviction based on the new DNA evidence and the allegations of racial bias in the jury selection process. Despite these efforts, lower courts continually denied the appeals, and his conviction was upheld. In a last-ditch effort to save Williams' life, his attorneys brought the case to the U.S. Supreme Court, asking for an emergency stay of execution based on the new DNA results and other irregularities in the case. Three of the Supreme Court justices, Sonia Sotomayor, Elena Kagan, and Ketanji Brown Jackson, expressed concern about the case and voted in favor of delaying the execution. However, the majority of justices declined to hear the case, effectively allowing the execution to proceed without offering any written explanation. Governor Mike Parson's decision. Missouri Governor Mike Parson also had the authority to grant clemency or delay the execution. However, Parson refused to intervene, citing the extensive legal process that had already taken place over the past 2 decades. In his statement, Parson emphasized that multiple courts had reviewed the case and had found no credible evidence to overturn Williams' conviction. Parson's decision not to grant clemency drew significant criticism from activists, legal experts, and civil rights organizations, who argued that the new evidence should have been thoroughly reconsidered before proceeding with an irreversible punishment. Final hours and execution. On the evening of the execution, protesters gathered outside the Bonne Terre prison in Missouri, holding vigils and calling for a halt to the execution. Among those gathered were civil rights advocates, religious leaders, and family members of both Williams and Felicia Gale. Many carried signs highlighting the uncertainties in Williams' case and the dangers of executing someone with unresolved claims of innocence. In his final hours, Williams, who had converted to Islam while incarcerated, maintained his innocence. He delivered a statement of faith, expressing gratitude to Allah and continuing to assert that he did not commit the crime. Williams declined a final meal and instead opted to spend time in prayer. At approximately 6:10 p.m. Central Time, Williams was pronounced dead after receiving a lethal injection of pentobarbital, a drug used in Missouri's executions. His death reignited the national debate over the death penalty, especially in cases where evidence remains in dispute. Reactions and legal implications. Williams' execution has stirred a wide range of reactions from various quarters. Advocates against the death penalty view his case as emblematic of the inherent flaws in the system. They argue that the irreversible nature of capital punishment leaves no room for error, and executing individuals with unresolved claims of innocence undermines the principles of justice. The new DNA evidence, coupled with the involvement of the St. Louis County prosecutor in questioning the original conviction, raised concerns about the reliability of the legal system, especially in death penalty cases. Williams' defense team, as well as groups like the Innocence Project, have argued that his case illustrates how individuals on death row can be convicted based on weak or incomplete evidence, often without the chance to fully challenge that evidence before it is too late. Conversely, proponents of the death penalty, including Missouri state officials, argue that the legal process functioned as intended. They maintain that after 2 decades of appeals and reviews by various courts, the decision to execute Williams was lawful and just. They point to the circumstantial evidence and witness testimonies as sufficient grounds for his conviction and argue that DNA evidence alone should not be enough to overturn a conviction when other factors are considered. The broader debate over capital punishment Marcellus Williams' case touches on several broader issues within the American criminal justice system. The role of DNA evidence in overturning convictions has been central to many exonerations in recent years, with organizations like the Innocence Project helping to free individuals who were wrongly convicted. Williams' case has intensified discussions about how new evidence, particularly DNA, should be handled in cases where a person's life is at stake. Additionally, the case has shed light on the racial disparities that persist in the application of the death penalty. Studies have shown that black defendants, particularly those convicted of killing white victims, are more likely to receive the death penalty. This has led to calls for a moratorium on executions until such racial biases can be addressed. Finally, the case raises ethical questions about the morality of capital punishment, especially in situations where reasonable doubt exists. For many, the idea of executing someone with unresolved claims of innocence highlights the fundamental risk of the death penalty, the possibility of executing an innocent person. Thanks for joining us on this truth-seeking journey. Stay curious, stay informed, and remember, truth is worth the quest. See you next time.